Before we dive into our message this morning, let's go and ask for God's hand on it. Father, as we approach your word this morning, it's your message that we want to hear. We understand that it's your truth and your spirit, which your spirit uses to affect change in our life. And so we ask now as we approach your word that there would be nothing that would hinder our ability to receive your word and obey it and follow it. I ask that there would be nothing in my life that would hinder your ability for your word to go forth this morning. And so, Father, we just look forward to what your Spirit and Word have for us this morning, and we trust that it will accomplish the purposes that you've designed it to. We ask all of this in the name of your Son and for your glory. Amen. I enjoy playing games on occasion, unless it is Phase 10. That game is of the devil. Spoons or Dutch Blitz. One of the reasons why I don't like Phase 10 is Tiff will play it. I'm getting through, you got to do all the cards in order, whatever. And I'm still working on one or two. The next thing I know, I'm on Phase 8. Garbage. You cheated. I need to look at the person that shuffled it. I don't do that. My favorite game is Monopoly. Tiff would say that I only like to play games that I know I can win, or I'm fairly certain. I think it's the opposite. I think she wants to play games that she knows she can win and that'll frustrate me. But I do remember my mom would not play with me, a couple of my friends, a cousin, or me and my brother. We can have some highly competitive games of Monopoly. We are out for blood when we play. One game that has always intrigued me is chess. I've never learned how to play it. The game intrigues me because I enjoy watching smug people play against some guy they underestimate, and they think they've got everything done, and then within like 6 moves, the guy's like checkmate, and they're like, wait a minute, like what? Like what happened? And chess can be a lot like life. You think you have a plan worked out. You think everything is going great. Then suddenly, life delivers check. Like, how did we get there? And then we find ourselves being chased around life. And that shocks us in first. In fact, I would tell the teenagers when I was teaching teen Sunday school that you'll know that you don't think that you're an adult at 18 or 21 or even 35. And they would look at me like, what do you mean? You're not an adult until you look both ways before you cross the street. There's nothing coming. You go to cross the street, and then you're hit by an airplane. And you'll know that moment when it arrives. That is when you are an adult. All of a sudden, life becomes like chess, and you are running for your life with your king. One of the key lessons of chess, at least from my limited understanding, is to always pay attention to your queen and the opponent's queen. The queen is to be guarded and protected, other than the king, more than any other piece. The queen is the most powerful offensive weapon. Your opponent's queen should be your most feared enemy. So know where the queens are located. If we could summarize the downfall of Haman, we could summarize it by stating that he lost track of the queen. Haman had no idea that Queen Esther was about to become his most dangerous and feared opponent. In our last session, we saw Esther risk her life to go up before the king, just to ask him if he and Haman would come to dinner. Sounds like a rather odd reason to approach someone and put your life on the line to ask them to come to dinner. But so then I'll tell you what I really want to ask you if you'll come to this dinner. The king most likely assumes that, she wants a new dress or shoes, maybe her own palace. Maybe she wants a new iPhone or new laptop. He's thinking it may be expensive, but it's not. Sure, I'll go ahead and do it. She can't be can't want anything too bad. So after the dinner, to our surprise, as we saw last week, and most likely Esther's, her request, she asked, hey, will you come back the next night? Come back to another dinner, and then I'll tell you then what I want to do, what I want. There was one person in that whole scene that was not surprised. In fact, it was during the intervening night when God's providence is clearly seen. God-inspired insomnia causes the king to stay awake. Nothing works to put him to sleep, so he asked for the Persian congressional record to be read to him. And of all the days and all the acts and all the orders of business that could have been read, the servant reads of the day where Mordecai uncovers a plot to kill the king. That happened a few years earlier. The king is then reminded that he did nothing to honor or reward Mordecai for saving his life for that special service. And that was a royal custom, to be named, be given some sort of honor or reward, and then the title of king's benefactor. He hadn't done that. That same night, after the dinner, Haman leaves on cloud 9. Mordecai doesn't bow and Haman's like, I can't deal with it anymore. I've got to take this guy out. So he prepares a gallows on which to hang Mordecai. And he's going to do it the next day before he goes to dinner with Esther and the king. And so life's pretty bleak right now. Not only are the Jewish people set to be destroyed and annihilated, Mordecai is going to die. The one person that Esther would want to save above anyone else is going to be dead before she's able to try to save Mordecai and her people. So the gallows are done. Haman is so excited he goes to work early the next morning, where instead of being honored by the king orders him to honor and reward Mordecai in the exact same way Haman would like to be honored. Haman had life mapped out for the next several steps. I've had this dinner with the king and queen. I'm going to go to dinner the next night. I'm going to be even more trusted. I'm going to be even more honored. I'm going to be like even more the man than I already am, and life is great. I'm going to kill Mordecai, this guy who refuses to do what everybody else does and recognize how great I am. He's got it mapped out. But now, in chapter 7, he's about to be even more stunned than he was honoring Mordecai. This game of chess that Haman has had mapped out now has become a game of chase. What's he going to do with 75 feet high gallows? I mean, everyone in Haman's neighborhood knows this 75-foot spike is for Mordecai. He wants to kill Mordecai. Everyone in his neighborhood knows it, a few people in the palace. What Haman doesn't realize is it's about to get worse, because his edict to kill all the Jews not only impacts Mordecai, now one of the king's benefactors, one of the people that the king has favor, but it also impacts Esther, the queen, the king's favorite wife. Haman failed to do his homework. He's moved pieces all over his board while assuming Queen Esther was not a concern. Nothing to be worried about there. He failed to keep his eye on the queen. And so Haman rushes home that afternoon after honoring Mordecai. We saw that last week. He tells his family the news. Immediately, his wife tells him, if he really is a Jew and you've begun to fall, you're basically done. You're basically toast. You're in some deep water. They get those words out of their mouth barely. In verse 6, verse 14 tells us, while they were yet talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried to bring Haman to the feast that Esther had prepared. The king's limousine rushes up, and the eunuchs come out. The king's guards arrive to whisk Haman away to the dinner with the king and queen. So basically, we see the next scene open up in verse 1. So the king and Haman went in to feast with Queen Esther, and on the second day, as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king said to Esther, "What is your wish, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom it will be granted." Basically, look, what do you want? You've put me off one day. What do you want? Money is no object. You can have anything you want. If it's in my power to do so, I'm going to give it to you, no matter how much it costs. Move on to verse 3. Then Queen Esther answered, "If I had found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleased the king," we're going to stop right there. So he's anticipating her to say, "You know what? I want a new dress or shoes. I saw this new thing online. An ad came up on my Facebook page. You know, I saw this new phone. I've seen this new jewelry. Man, my best friend just made this exquisite piece of art. Like, I want it to hang up on my wall." That's what he's expecting. Yet what happens is, if it please the king, let my life be granted for my wish and my people for my request. For we have been sold. And now she quotes the edict itself. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed. to be killed, to be annihilated. If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have been silent, for our affliction is not to be compared with that loss to the king. Note the change in Esther. For 5 years, she's kept her lineage a secret. I'm a Jew, but no one's going to know it. I'm going to hide it above all costs. And Esther could have tried to keep her secret even now and advocate for the Jewish people, right? I mean, she could have said, hey, king, I got some staff and friends that are Jewish. I like them. They're cool. They're helpful. I really appreciate all the stuff they do for me. I don't think Haman should kill them. No, Esther, 2 times in her request to the king, identifies with the Jewish people. My life, my people. The king is slow to grasp the concept. You know, most women can probably relate to a man being slow to grasp a certain concept. The king is not really necessarily picking up what Queen Esther's putting down. However, Haman's heart, I believe, is beginning to race. Esther continues generating suspense and tension. Notice again verse 4. Let my life be granted for me for my wish. Let my people for my request. Verse 4. We've been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, to be annihilated. If we had been sold merely as slaves, I would have been silent. Our affliction would not to be compared with the king. King, if we were simply going to be sold as slaves, I wouldn't say a thing. It wouldn't bother you. You would be getting something out of this edict, but we're going to be killed. The king is losing some valuable assets. And like Haman, Esther appeals to the king's self-interest. You're not even getting anything out of this. People are just going to die. It's not going to do you any good. And it's stunning news to both men. The king finds out that his wife is in danger. Neither he nor Haman understood that, but the king doesn't fully understand why his wife is in danger, as we'll see momentarily. Esther wisely avoids any hint of implicating the king. I believe that the king simply didn't know that the Jews were condemned in the edict, and that's the reason for his confusion here. He had such a callous disregard for life that when he says earlier in Esther chapter 2 that he doesn't care about the people or what he can get, just do what you want to do, I think that's true. He simply didn't know in his callous disregard for life. Hey, just write the edict, Haman, and get rid of these people that were causing trouble. And it's not until later, chapter 8, that Esther gives the king the full picture of what's going on, including the fact that she and Mordecai are cousins. But for now, Esther wisely only shares just enough details for the king to understand the danger and the seriousness of her request. She doesn't want to give too many. She wants to get the king the simple fact, hey, someone wants to kill me, my family, and my extended family. That's what's important here. Haman, however, now discovers that the queen is a Jewess. He's coming to find out that the queen, the king's favorite wife, who, by the way, is not that far removed from banishing his previous favorite wife, now he's given the order to kill that wife. Haman knows exactly what Esther's saying. Haman is the one that wrote that edict for the Jewish people to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. I've always wondered, why it seems to be a tad redundant. Destroy, kill, and annihilate. Why those words? Wouldn't one suffice? Basically, what Haman is doing is there's absolutely no loophole. There's no way to get around it. There's no way to do, there's no hope. I mean, it's not only irrevocable, there's no loophole at all. And Haman has been excited, waiting for this day to arrive. And now, to his complete horror, he finds out that of all the people in the palace, all the people in the city, the capital city of Persia, Esther the queen is one of those people that he wants to kill, that he wants to destroy, kill, and annihilate. He missed the queen. I can imagine the knot, the sick feeling in Haman's gut as he waits to see what will happen next. We see in verse 7, the king arose in his wrath from the wine drinking. But go up to verse 5 and find out why. The king gets the simple picture. His wife's in danger. He doesn't realize why. Neither he nor Haman saw it ahead of time. Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther, "Who is he? Where is he who has dared to do this?" Esther said, "A foe, an enemy, this wicked Haman." And Haman was terrified before the king and queen. I mean, the king is enraged. He's filled with anger. Someone is after his favored wife, which means that someone is messing with his authority in the kingdom, messing with his authority not only in his kingdom, in his very own palace, in his own home, with his own wife. And then Esther, a foe and an enemy, this wicked Haman. Talk about, a punch in the face. She doesn't just blurt out his name. It's Haman. She continues to raise tension and suspense. It's a foe, an enemy, wicked Haman. Haman rightfully becomes terrified. He drops his phone. He doesn't know where his keys are. He may not even know how to spell his name. He is rightly terrified. So the next scene we see an unseen danger, an unexpected traitor. The king was not anticipating his most trusted advisor, his prime minister, to be named as the one that was behind this treachery and seeking to undermine his authority. And so he becomes terrified. In the next scene, we see a shocking reversal. Notice verse 7. The king arose in his wrath from the wine drinking and went into the palace garden. The king has quite a conundrum. How can he punish Haman for an edict stamped with his own royal seal? How can he deal with Haman without admitting his own role in it? How can he soften the edict? Keep in mind, it's written in the laws of the Medes and Persians. He can't revoke it. How can he soften it? Because it leaves no loophole. Destroy, kill, annihilate. There's no room. It's pretty clear what's going to happen. Can I somehow protect Esther, my favorite wife's life, and still protect my own reputation? If I can't protect her, how do I explain her death without looking like a Nimrod? Man, I can just see him walking around the garden, perhaps pacing, nervous. Man, why did I trust Haman so completely? Why didn't I read the edict? Why didn't I sign it? Why did I let him sign it on my behalf? One author points out that there was no way of knowing how many edicts the king signed that day. Who knows how many matters of government were on his mind? Haman also had proposed things in such a way that he seemed to be solving a problem so that the king would be free to think about other things. Go back to the edict in chapter 3. Again, there is a certain people scattered abroad, dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every other people. They do not keep the king's laws. It is not to the king's profit to tolerate them. If it please the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed. Notice Haman never once mentions the group of people. He never presents it. The details of what they're doing that's wrong is vague. He's taking advantage of the king's mindset at that time, which was, I'm tired of these people challenging my authority. I've had defeat after defeat after defeat. So if there's a group of people that are looking to overthrow me, just take them out. Yeah, take care of the problem. Thank you, Haman. None of that will matter publicly. When he stands before the press and the cameras are rolling and he is giving a defense of the decisions there, the news that the queen's dead. When the reporter asked, well, didn't you sign that edict anyway? None of those other defenses, none of those other legitimate perhaps reasons, none of that's going to matter. At the end of the day, the king's own signature is on that law. He signed it. It doesn't matter. Now, the king doesn't realize it in verse 7. He's just pondering all this stuff. He's thinking about what to do, formulating a way to get out of this, save Esther's life, and go from there. The king doesn't realize it, but Haman is about to give the king a get-out-of-jail-free card. He is about to solve the king's conundrum for him. Notice this desperate traitor has a bigger problem on his hands now. He's going to die, and much quicker than this edict is going to take out Esther's people. He realizes what's going on. So the king rises in his wrath. He goes to the garden, but Haman stayed to beg for his life from Queen Esther. He saw that harm was determined against him by the king. As I was studying this, I'm sort of thinking, okay, well, why didn't you go after the king when he got up? Like, try to spin it. Try to be like, well, I didn't know, or we can do this, or maybe it's not really true. Try to put some spin on everything. Haman makes a split decision. I mean, he obviously decides, well, I can't go out to the king because clearly the king is already determined, like something bad's going to happen. I don't need to go make it even worse. There's a proverb, better to be thought a fool than open your mouth and remove all doubt. Perhaps he's like, the king already thinks I've done something treacherous. The more I talk, I might just be digging my own grave deeper. So what does he do? He can't run out of the house. The king would just order soldiers then to go capture him, and he'd be killed. Haman is quite literally trapped. God just whispered, checkmate, to Haman. God moves a queen into position, a queen who revealed Haman's treachery, a queen who Haman should have watched. Haman now begs for his life from Queen Esther. He begs for his life. His situation is so desperate. He begs for his life from someone who is condemned to die. Death is certain. She can't save his life. She can't even save her own. She just had to request the king to save her life. The truth of the matter is that they both are begging for their lives. They both are bound by the decision of the king. What's he going to say? The text informs us in verse 8, the king returned from the palace garden to the place where they were drinking wine. Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was. And the king said, will he even assault the queen in my presence, in my own house? Haman began to fall on the couch where Esther reclined during the dinner. Persian law stated that no man was allowed within 7 paces of any member of the king's harem. Touching the king's wife, history tells us, was a capital offense. In his anger, passion, and terror, Haman falls on her couch. The language would indicate most likely kneeling over her, perhaps even grabbing her by the shoulders. I can only guess, but I suspect his hatred for the Jews really comes out here. Who do you think you are? You are just a little girl, a little Jewish girl. I'm the prime minister. It should be you that's dying, not me. And while he's on her couch, evidently in a threatening posture, the king returns to the dining room and roars, verse 8, will he even assault the queen in my presence? Is he really going to kill my wife in front of me? In the place where she lives, in the place that I own? Is this man really going to do this now? Verse 8, as soon as the words left the mouth of the king, they covered Haman's face. That means that Haman is condemned to die. On the spot. He's no longer worthy to be looked upon or look upon another. Well, why didn't the king do that before he left the garden? Or before he went to the garden? Persian law required 2 serious accusations that could stand in court to execute Haman. And now the king had them. Haman's plot to kill the Jews could be shown to be a direct threat to the life of the queen. That would stand up in court. Esther is a Jew because he wanted all the Jewish people to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. That's a direct threat to the queen. Also, not only that, Haman approaches the queen, most likely in a threatening manner. And so there is the second capital offense that would stand in court. Then it is cemented beyond all doubt. beyond anything Esther could have imagined, and immediately puts Haman on the fast track to execution. There would be no trial for Haman. Notice verse 9. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs in attendance on the king, said, "Hey, moreover, the gallows that Haman has prepared for Mordecai, whose word saved the king's life, is standing at Haman's house, 50 cubits high." King, you probably didn't know this, but if you look over there, you see that big, tall spike over there? That's gallows that Haman was going to kill Mordecai. The same Mordecai that you just honored for saving your life. One of the king's favorite people. Haman wanted him dead too. That tipped the scales all the way over there on the floor. Who is this guy, this eunuch here? It's the only time his name is mentioned. Who is it? Where did he come from? Where did he come? And I can just imagine Haman like, okay, it's already bad enough. Like, I'm already done. Like, seriously? Like, really? This guy, Haman probably never even gave this guy a second thought. Because of his testimony, everything that the king has heard up to that point smells like political intrigue. It smells like disloyalty. It smells like maybe even the king was thinking, you know what, maybe that time Mordecai saved my life. Maybe the real mastermind of that plot was Haman. In fact, the Greek translation of the text tells us that Haman, the king's most trusted advisor, will be executed for treason. I mean, talk about a jump, checkmate, Yahtzee, go straight to jail, all at one time. I mean, that's everything all rolled into one. Someone will look at this account and marvel at all the coincidences and the amazing irony. As believers, I trust we look at it and marvel at God's amazing providence and sovereignty. God is the ultimate person of strategy. The game ultimately belongs to Him. Even when He is silent, He's present. When He seems removed, He remains sovereign. When we are waiting, He continues to work. Even when He seems late, His purposes are fulfilled at exactly the right time. And we see a complete, stunning reversal. That eunuch points out the gallows, verse 10, the end of verse 9. The king said, okay, hang him on that. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. And then the wrath of the king abated. Exactly the right time. Now, if you're Mordecai, when would you have liked that God to have worked out all of that? Before the edict ever was written, right? Would have liked that. Probably thinking it's too late. Esther, when she hears about the gallows and everything else, like, man, it's going to be too late. I messed up. I really choked. I messed up everything. We read this story. If we read this story without the benefit of knowing what happens, we would tend to think, well, where's God? Where's God at? He's still there. He's working. And He works out everything in such a way that Esther, Mordecai, the greatest wise men in the world, could not have orchestrated a more clear, definitive, decisive response. 4 observations from this scene for our life. Number 1, God uses reversals in our lives to move us forward. When Esther opens up in chapter 2, we get into chapter 2, things had gone so well for Esther and Mordecai. Esther was the queen. Mordecai was promoted. And then wham, the airplane hit them as they were crossing the street. Everything was great. And all because of one egomaniac who could not get over the fact that one guy, Mordecai, wouldn't grovel at his feet. But if this edict isn't signed, who knows if Esther reveals her secret? Most likely, from the way that we can see, neither Mordecai nor Esther probably would have ever identified with God's people. It was the danger of impending death, the hopelessness of the edict, the reversal of their fortune that brought them to their knees, then to their feet with courage and trust in the providence of God. God uses reversals in our lives to move us forward in our walk with Him. We can understand that, right? The times that our faith has grown, how does faith grow? You got to have a reason to need more. And so it's usually in the difficulty, adversity, the trials of life, those things where we wonder, like, God, like, I'm glad you know what you're doing. Where are you at? That God moves us forward, just as he did with Esther and Mordecai. Also, God uses unlikely channels to carry out his thoughts. Esther had no clue that one of the king's eunuchs, it's not one of hers. She might have expected one of her staff to pile on. This was one of the king's eunuchs. And he delivers the final piece of information, an unlikely source of support for the Jewish people. Whoever that eunuch was in his backstory, he provided the last nail for Haman's coffin. Just a eunuch among thousands. Spent his days standing in the court, waiting on the king. Just a little pawn on the chessboard. Haman, the king, Esther, there were probably plenty of people who maybe they didn't even know this guy's name, Harbona, until that very moment. When he gives that piece of information, I can see Ahasuerus. And who are you again? Just a little pawn. But at God's timing, that little insignificant pawn takes out the prime minister of the most powerful nation on earth. Another observation, God puts us often through the greatest difficulty before providing deliverance. The truth is, if God simply was concerned with our deliverance, he'd do it quickly and painlessly. He'd fix our problems for us, if he even allowed us to have them in the first place. And so if he wanted to simply deliver us, he'd do it quickly. He'd do it painlessly. But God wants more for us than our simple deliverance. God wants our character to develop. If God only wanted to make us comfortable, then there would never be a roadblock. There would never be a detour. There would never be no reversals or trials. We'd never experience any of that. But God's goal, all things work together for good, Romans 8:28, to them that know God. What's God's goal? We usually stop right there, the next verse. All things work together for them that know God, to them who are called according to his purpose, that we might be conformed to the image of his Son. God is interested in our development. He wants to conform us to the image of Christ. And that is why God is only interested in developing us through the challenges of life. Again, he's going to deliver us. He's going to carry us through. We're reminded over and over again that these trials we experience on earth are not going to last forever. Now, they may last a long time from our human perspective. But when we get into heaven, it's all going to be a distant memory. God is interested in developing our character, developing our faith, developing us to become more like Christ through the challenges of life. He wants to develop us through them, not deliver us from them. And then last of all, God offers a special partnership with those who submit to his providence. 1 Corinthians 3:8. Paul's writing to the Corinthian believers, and he introduces a co-laboring principle to the Corinthian believers. Actually, we'll go up for verse 6. Paul writes that he planted, Apollos watered, God gave the growth. Neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth. He who plants and he who waters are one, and each will receive his wages according to his labor. For we are God's fellow workers. That's an amazing statement right there. We are God's fellow workers, his co-laborers. The point of that passage is we serve in whatever capacity and wherever we are located by God on the chessboard of life. Wherever he places us, however he wants us to serve, we do that on the chessboard. Philippians 1:22 and Philippians 4:17, Paul writes, these Philippian believers, they supported him financially. He writes them a thank you letter and points out in Philippians 1:22, hey, I'm praying that God will add the fruit of my ministry to your account. Can you imagine being part of that church and reaping some of the rewards that Paul will receive because of your faithful service and serving and obeying God where you were at? The Philippian believers didn't go with Paul physically to where he was sharing the gospel. They just financially, prayerfully supported him. And Paul's like, you're my co-laborers. You're fellowshipping with me. You're serving with me as I go and do God's will for my life. Whether you find yourself on the chessboard as a pawn, bishop, a knight, I'm probably forgetting another one, someone can tell me later, a queen or a king, when you stand and serve, the point is in 1 Corinthians, you are fully rewarded as a co-laborer with Christ. But we must submit to God's providence. However He has made you, wherever He has placed you, whatever capacity He has chosen for you. The challenge today from this passage, and I believe Esther chapter 7, is each of us needs to submit today to the assignment of God's providence for us individually and corporately. It'll mean identifying with God's people, as Esther did. It will mean boldly proclaiming the truth of the matter. But as we submit to God's providence, He offers a special partnership where we become His co-laborer and will be rewarded based on how we've accomplished what He designed us to do, whether it was planting the seed, watering, maybe weeding the message of the gospel from time to time, or whether we're the one God, we pray with the person and help them come to Christ. All fully rewarded each step of the way as we submitted to God's providence in our life.